Good morning. I'm Dr. Gayatri Vinay, Associate Professor, Department of Pediatrics. Today we are going to talk about ventricular septal defect. Isolated ventricular septal defect is most commonly recognized congenital heart disease. This incidence is around 2 per 1,000 live births. 75 to 80% of small VSDs close spontaneously by late childhood. 10 to 50% of the large VSDs close spontaneously. 90% of those which have been closed, usually the closure occurs before the age of 3 years. And VSDs occur during the first 8 weeks of fetal life. The three components of the ventricular septal are interventricular muscular partition, endocardial cushions, the bulbar ridges that separate the blood vessels. This is the embryology. The interventricular septum is formed from the upwards. It is formed upwards from the floor of the bulboventricular cavity. It divides into right and left halves. It meets to fuse the atrioventricular cushions and partially fuses with them. And the two ridges, right and the left, from the right and the left, arise in the conical upper part of the bulboventricular cavity, which fuse with each other and then forms the bulbar septum. The gap persists between the two is filled by the proliferation of the tissue from the atrioventricular cushions. Ventricular septal defect could be seen associated with other heart defects, such as in the left side, you could see aortic stenosis, coarctation of aorta, or it could be associated with the right heart defects such as tetralogy of Fallot, double outlet right ventricle, truncus arteriosus. It could be seen in association with several other chromosomal disorders like trisomy 21, trisomy 13, trisomy 18, and you can also see it in 22q11 deletion, where there is a tetralogy of Fallot is the most common anomaly, and Holt-Oram syndrome. Recurrence risk for ventricular septal defects based on the parental VSDs is paternal is around 2%, maternal is around 6 to 10%. This is the part, you could see the anatomical division of the ventricular septum. This is the membranous part of the ventricular septum. The remaining would be the muscular portion of the ventricular septum. And this is the inlet septum, this is the trabecular septum, and this would be the outlet septum. Based on the presence of the ventricular septal defect, based on its location, it is classified as type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4, whether it is outlet, paramembranous, inlet, and muscular respectively. This picture again shows you the various positions of the ventricular septal defect. Based on the size, we could further classify as small, moderate, and large. In large VSDs, you could see the size is more than 15 millimeters, and it is almost two-thirds of the aortic annular size, and here both the right and left ventricular pressures are usually equal. In moderate condition, the size is around 5 to 15 millimeters and half the aortic annular size, and the right ventricular pressures attribute to around half of the left ventricular pressures. Small VSDs, it is usually only the size is only attributed to 1/3 of the acute annular size, and it is very insufficient enough to raise the right ventricular pressures. This is a picture showing the doubly committed subarterial VSDs. This is the muscular VSD. And coming to the pathophysiology, this is the shunt, this is the defect, this is a VSD. And the two determining factors are the size of the VSD and the pulmonary vascular resistance, which determine the pressure gradient across the VSDs and the volume of the shunt that flows across. Okay, after birth, usually the pulmonary vascular resistance falls, and thereby there is a large flow across the shunt if it's a large VSD, which increases the pulmonary arterial pressures, initially flow related, thereby the pulmonary venous return increases, and there is a left atrial dilatation, and there is a left ventricular overload. This pulmonary hypertension initially is because of the flow related, and it is reversible, but later there is an intimal proliferation and medial hypertrophy, which leads to a fixed irreversible pulmonary hypertension. Flow through the lungs decreases as the pulmonary vascular resistance increases, and hence thereby the shunt volume also decreases. Eventually, when the pulmonary vascular resistance becomes more or exceeds the systemic vascular resistance, then there is a reversible of shunt which occurs, that is right to left shunt follows, which results in cyanosis, and this phenomenon is called as Eisenmenger's complex. Okay, this is again the same depiction of the Eisenmenger's complex. Clinical features are based again upon the size of the VSD. If it's a small VSD, usually the patient remains asymptomatic and the murmur could be appreciated after a few days of birth. And if it's a moderate VSD, then it could be presenting with frequent respiratory tract infections. Large VSDs again present with frequent respiratory tract infections, dyspnea on exertion, defective growth, congestive cardiac failures, and the functional capacity markedly is reduced. And on examination, you could see a hyperkinetic apex. There could be a thrill because of the murmur, and there is a pansystolic murmur because there is a shunt that is flowing throughout the systole. Throughout, when there is a ventricular is getting ventricles are getting contracted, the shunt is throughout the systole, and therefore it is a pansystolic murmur. And because of the increased flow across the pulmonary artery, which results in an ejection systolic murmur, and because of there is increased flow from the left atrium to the left ventricle across the mitral valve, it results in a mid-diastolic murmur. And the S1 thereby is masked by the murmur, and S2 is widely split because there is an increased venous return across the pulmonary artery, and then there is an increased flow to the pulmonary venous return. As a result, what happens? There is a P2 is delayed, which results in the wide variable split. As we already saw, Eisenmenger's complex, infants with Eisenmenger may become easily fatigued, especially during crying spells and at feeding time. Low tolerance for extra exertion, shortness of breath or rapid breathing, fainting or syncopal episodes, difficulty in eating, breathing or sucking, poor weight gain or slow growth or physical retardation is noted. Spontaneous closure is known primarily with very most commonly with muscular VSDs. And the outlet and the inlet VSDs rarely close. Chances differ with age at the detection. At 1 month of age, 80% of large VSDs close. At 6 months, 50%, and at 12 months, 25%. Complications would be pulmonic stenosis due to right ventricular hypertrophy, pulmonary arterial hypertension, aortic regurgitation due to prolapse of the aortic valve leaflet, infective endocarditis. And when you look at the investigations, when you see the ECG, it may show right or left or combined ventricular hypertrophy. Presence of right atrial dilatation represents elevated right ventricular pressures and the pulmonary arterial pressures. Post-operative, it could also show a right bundle branch block. And chest X-ray would show a cardiomegaly proportional to the volume overload, mainly the left ventricle, left atrium, and the right ventricular dilatation would be noted. Increased pulmonary blood flow in forms of pulmonary plethora and the pulmonary arterial hypertension. Unless the left atrium is significantly enlarged, it is difficult to differentiate from ASD. Here you can see the X-ray showing the ventricular septal defect in a 7-month-old. It shows a moderate cardiac enlargement, including the right atrial, right ventricular, and the left atrial enlargement, with posterior displacement of the left main stem bronchus and increased pulmonary vascularity. The 2D echo determines the VSD location. You can see the VSD. Okay. And left ventricular outflow morphology, aortic valve involvement, prominent bulging of the tissue into the right ventricle, either it could be an aneurysmal or perimembranous VSD, could be determined. This is yet again another picture of VSD. This is the ventricular septal defect. Okay. When cardiac catheterization, it could also be helpful for identifying multiple VSDs. Cardiac catheterization can quantify the shunt volume and the pulmonary arterial resistance. And an angiogram is also done. The contrast is injected into the left ventricle. It will localize the site and the size of the defect. The contrast could be seen entering into the pulmonary artery, will demonstrate the left to right shunt. This is an MRI showing the defect into the flow jet across the defect into the right ventricle, indicating there is a left to right shunt. How would you differentiate the differentiating features from a large VSD versus a small VSD? Large VSD, usually there is a hyperkinetic pulmonary arterial hypertension because of increased flow. There is a pansystolic murmur with a thrill, wide variable split S2, and mitral mid-diastolic murmur. Whereas in a small VSD, there is an obstructive pulmonary arterial hypertension because of right ventricular hypertrophy presenting with a parasternal heave, absent thrill, closely split S2, and no mitral murmur. If it's a small VSD, no medical or surgery treatment is required. If it's an asymptomatic, just observe for the closure, spontaneous closure. If it's a large to moderate VSD, treatment of congestive cardiac failure has to be done and determining when to repair. And surgical correction has to be done before there is an irreversible damage to the pulmonary vasculature occurs. You can see the pulmonary vasculature, there is a pulmonary arterial hypertension. Indications for intervention, that is congestive cardiac failure in infancy, left to right shunt when it is large, pulmonic stenosis or the pulmonary arterial hypertension or an aortic regurgitation, small VSD with an outlet type with an aortic valve prolapse, or a severe irreversible fixed pulmonary arterial hypertension. Surgical consideration, preoperative VSD location has to be ascertained, avoidance of injury to the conduction pathways, an operative technique needed to secure the closure. The approaches could be right atrial, transpulmonary, transaortic, right ventricular and left ventricular approach. Here you can see there is a patch closure of the ventricular septal defect. The patch is being placed across. Okay, there are several interventional approaches. Percutaneous device closures are also being done. Muscular VSDs can typically be closed percutaneously. Okay, the next one, we will continue with patent ductus arteriosus. Here you can see, before we go on to what is patent ductus arteriosus, we should know what is normal fetal circulation. You can see here the blood arrives via the umbilical vein and it shunts off via the ductus venosus into the inferior vena cava, and from the inferior vena cava it enters into the right atrium and flows across the foramen ovale, allows the oxygenated blood to enter into the right atrium to reach the left atrium. The ductus arteriosus, okay, which connects the aorta with the pulmonary artery, further shunts away the blood away from the lungs and then into the descending aorta. Here the mixed blood traverses to the body, entire of the body, and then back to the placenta via the aorta. So at birth, several changes occur at birth to initiate the normal functional closure of the ductus arteriosus within the first 15 to 18 hours of life. Spontaneous respirations result in increased blood oxygen content. Prostaglandin levels decrease because of the placental ligation, and there is also an increased metabolism of prostaglandins within the pulmonary circulation by the prostaglandin dehydrogenase. As a result of all these, the prostaglandin levels decrease, which results in a hemodynamically closure of a ductus arteriosus within 15 hours and then completely closed by 2 to 3 weeks. This is the ductus arteriosus. When it is patent, we call it as patent ductus arteriosus. The incidence accounts to around 1 to 2001 in 2000 live births. In infants, it accounts for 10 to 12% of all congenital heart diseases. Patent ductus arteriosus are twice as common in female infants as in male infants. In rubella syndrome, males and females are equally affected. What are the risk factors to have a patent ductus arteriosus? Maternal rubella infection, premature birth, female sex, genetic factors, and if there is a preterm birth, especially less than 28 weeks of gestation, there is almost 60% incidence of PDA. And they are further classified as silent, where there is a PDA is there, which is just determined only by an echocardiography, which is incidental finding on several other investigations, and small PDA, moderate and large, and if it is associated with Eisenmenger's complex. Okay, what would be the natural history? Unlike PDA in a premature infants, which is actually very responsive to a oxygen, whereas in PDA, in a term neonate, the spontaneous closure in a term neonate is very rare. This is because the PDA in term infants results from a structural abnormality of the ductal smooth muscle rather than a decreased responsiveness of the ductal smooth muscle to oxygen, which is actually the component in a preterm PDA. CHF or recurrent pneumonia develops if the shunt is large. Pulmonary vascular obstructive disease may develop if there is a large PDA with pulmonary hypertension is left untreated. The history of the mother's pregnancy, when you go across and you take a history of the perinatal events, may provide clues associated with high incidence of PDA. Either it could be a preterm delivery or there could be an exposure of rubella in the first trimester in a non-immunized mother. And pre-DA is more common in a preterm infant, especially those with birth asphyxia or respiratory distress. So all these clues could be obtained from a proper history. And before we go on to the clinical manifestations, we should know what are the hemodynamics. Here also in patent ductus arteriosus, we have the left to right shunt from the aorta that is occurs to the pulmonary artery. The flow occurs both in the systole as well as in the diastole, as the pressure gradient is more always higher in the aorta than that of the pulmonary artery throughout the cardiac cycle. Okay, and thereby this results in a continuous murmur. The systolic as well as diastolic overloading of the pulmonary artery takes place, which results in increased blood flow to the lungs and thereby to the left atrium, where the left atrial enlargement occurs, and more amount of blood traveling across a normal mitral wave results in an accentuated S1 and mitral delayed diastolic murmur. Severity of symptoms depend on the degree of the left to right shunt, and it is determined by the size of the PDE, ductal resistance, cardiac output, as well as the systemic and the pulmonary vascular resistances. Patients with small PDA are asymptomatic, whereas with large PDAs, the symptoms may develop. The most common symptom is exercise intolerance, followed by dyspnea, peripheral edema, and palpitations. The signs would be tachycardia, tachypnea may be present in a child who is presenting with congestive cardiac failure, bounding peripheral pulses, wide pulse pressure is there, hyperactive precordium with a large shunt. There is a systolic trill may be present at the upper left sternal border. The P2 is usually normal, but its intensity may be accentuated if there is pulmonary hypertension. A grade 1 to 4 of 6 continuous machinery murmur is best audible at the left infraclavicular area or upper left sternal border. At the apical diastolic rumble may be heard when the PDA shunt is large because of the increased flow across the normal mitral valve. Patients with small ductus do not have any of the above findings. The duration of the diastolic murmur reflects the pulmonary arterial pressures. Elevated pulmonary arterial pressure leads to a decreased gradient for the left to right flow through the PDA during the diastole, which results in a shorter diastolic murmur. As the pulmonary pressure increases, the systolic component of the murmur will shorten. Right to left flow may not generate a systolic flow. Differential cyanosis. If pulmonary vascular obstructive disease develops, a right to left ductal shunt results in cyanosis only in the lower half of the body. What would be the investigations? ECG. With a small shunt, the ECG is usually normal. With left to right ventricular hypertrophy of the volume overload type could be seen with increasing the shunt size with left ventricular volume overload. Right ventricular hypertrophy is seen with pulmonary arterial hypertension. The chest X-ray may be normal in a small shunt, whereas if it is a large, moderate to large size shunt, you could see a cardiomegaly. The PDA with enlargement of left atrium, left ventricle, and ascending aorta. Pulmonary vascular markings would be increased. With pulmonary vascular obstructive disease, the heart size becomes normal with prominence of the pulmonary arterial segment and the hilar blood vessels. This is you could see the dilatation of the left atrium. In an echocardiogram, on a 2D echo, the left-sided chambers, that is left atrium and the left ventricle, are dilated due to increased venous return from the pulmonary circulation. This constitutes left ventricular volume overload, dilatation of the left atrium. Cardiac catheterization, the cardiac trajectory, what we call ISPAS, the catheter may easily pass from the pulmonary artery to the aorta through the PDA, and this gives a hairpin loop appearance. What would be the management? How do you manage such conditions? Pharmacological closure of the duct is indicated, especially for preterm infants. The treatment is with indomethacin or ibuprofen is the first line therapy. The dose is around 0.2 milligrams per kg per dose, stat. Intravenously, after 12 hours, you repeat another further 2 doses at around 0.1 milligrams per kg per dose at 12 hours apart. Total of 3 doses is given. Indomethacin therapy has been associated with an increased bleeding tendency resulting from platelet dysfunction, decreased urinary output, secondary to renal dysfunction, and necrotizing enterocolitis. As a result, ibuprofen has achieved closure rates equivalent to those of indomethacin with less renal toxicity. Secondary measures would be you have to treat the congestive cardiac failure, prophylaxis to be given against infective endocarditis. Non-surgical closures would include the percutaneous coils, which were initially developed in 1992, and they are considered as a preferred mode of treatment for older children as well as adults with PDAs of less than 3.5 millimeters in diameter. This is a picture of the duct occlude coil. And the most common complication with this would be the embolization of the coil or the device. We also have Aplazer ductal occluders, which means there is a cone-shaped plug occluder which has a thrombogenic wire mesh which is surrounding it, and this contains a thrombogenic substance. So when the stent is placed across the PDA, once the blood is forced through the center of the device, which is lined by this thrombogenic wire mesh, the PDA then initially clots off. Okay. There is an 89% of occlusion rate on post-procedure day 1 and around 97% to 100% complete occlusion after 1 month. This is the Aplazer with the Meyer mesh with the thrombogenic material. And we also have surgical closures. Okay. 1938, the first successful closure of PDA was performed, which was the first repair of congenital heart disease. With continued advances in percutaneous closure devices, surgery has become second-line therapy. And the procedure would be ligation and division through the left posterolateral thoracotomy approach without the cardiopulmonary bypass is a standard procedure. Mortality is around less than 1% for both the techniques. Complications could be either they could injury to the recurrent laryngeal nerve, the left phrenic nerve, the thoracic duct, or there could be a recanalization of the ductus, though it is a rare possibility. Complications of patent ductus arteriosus. The most common complication could be congestive cardiac failure, infective endocarditis, and pulmonary arterial hypertension. We should differentiate a continuous murmur, especially with other conditions. We could also get a continuous murmur with ventricular septal defects associated with aortic insufficiency, aortopulmonary window, or it could be has to be differentiated from an innocent venous hum. Arteriovenous communication such as a pulmonary arteriovenous fistula can also present a continuous murmur. Coronary artery fistula, systemic arteriovenous fistulas, and ruptured sinus of Valsalva aneurysm could also present with a continuous murmur. Thank you. Thank you for listening.